Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of werewolf horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. He howls at the moon, but he's no werewolf. I live in a small village called Mileham in Norfolk. It's a nice, quiet place, but it doesn't have much going for it. Honestly, I like it this way. I never grow tired of the scenic, countryside beauty, unblemished by the modern world. Mileham is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A one-pub town, as they say. The area doesn't attract too many tourists, which, again, is fine by me. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's the thought of us trying to cater to strangers. No, I'm not xenophobic. If you want to visit Mileham, I'll gladly open my home to you. Hell, I'll even buy you a drink and spend the evening sharing stories. What I don't want are droves of tourists flooding the area and the village trying to remodel itself and build new establishments to accommodate. I live here because it's quiet. If I wanted to navigate through clusters of tourists taking selfies, I'd move to London. But I digress. Mileham is and always will be my home. But there's one thing about it that disturbs me. One thing you won't find in the papers or in those little United Kingdom tourist pamphlets. We have a history of people who've exhibited a rather strange set of behaviors. Aaron Cox. He was the latest victim of the affliction that has quietly plagued my village since the 1700s. No one knows exactly when it started, only that it's as much ingrained in our history as fibers are ingrained in a tapestry. It always starts the same way. Chickens go missing, cows are found mutilated, and then someone breaks. This time, Aaron was the one who broke. I found him naked in my field one night, staring up at the sky and howling at the full moon. He had a wild look in his eyes. I dared not approach him, unsure of what to do. The village hadn't experienced this affliction since my parents' generation. I stood idly by and watched him from beyond an irrigation channel. Then, when the moon became masked behind a mass of clouds, he slowly walked away, as though nothing had happened. At the time, I had hoped it was nothing but drunken shenanigans, but I became more concerned the next day when I saw his wife Elizabeth and asked if he'd gotten home all right. When I told her about the encounter, she grew more agitated. She dodged my questions, claimed he'd been out of town, and excused herself. Somehow, I had a feeling she knew more than she let on. That very same night, I heard the howling again. It echoed through the valley, giving the impression of multiple voices from different sources. Aaron was outside, staring up at the sky and waving his arms like a drowning man hailing a ship. He switched between mad laughter and eerie yowls, as though conversing with an unseen presence. I closed my shutters and tried to sleep, ignoring the ruckus outside. It only occurred to me in the morning to call his wife. When I finally did, she sounded flustered. She told me Aaron had come home that afternoon, said he'd acted perfectly normal. They'd gone to bed together and in bed, they remained until the morning. The hairs at the back of my neck stood. Was she lying to me, or was it the truth? If Aaron hadn't been in the field, then who had? That day, I asked around town if anyone had gone missing and if anyone had heard or seen the man in my field. No one had. The Williams had lost a few chickens, but they blamed foxes. They'd found a spot in the chicken wire fence where claws or fangs had cut through to allow entry. These things happened. With nothing to go on, I gave up my search and returned to my chores. As I lay my head on my pillow, I heard a commotion coming from my barn. My cows were screaming. Have you ever heard the noise they make when you take their calves away? It's a kind of panicked, higher pitch yowl you wouldn't ever hear in any other circumstance. Well, that was the sound they were making, only louder and more panicked. I threw on a robe, grabbed a flashlight, and ran out into my barn. One of my cows was sprawled out in the middle of the central aisle, her throat ripped open with a jagged, messy gash. She was still breathing, still trying to emit that scream, but her sounds were muffled and gurgled. I knelt down in front of her and gently caressed her head to try and ease her pain. I wished I owned a shotgun so I could have put her out of her misery. Then I heard the crackle of dry straw coming from her stall and a pathetic little whimper. I twisted my head towards her pen and saw the outline of something curled up in the corner. I shone my light towards it. Aaron Cox twitched as the beam of light hit him. His eyes glowed like those of a cat in the night, but he was otherwise normal. There was no fur, no claws, and no fangs. Just a scrawny man in his birthday suit. He let out a howl and bolted out of the pen on all fours, disappearing into the night to do God only knows what. I could hear his howls in the distance as I tended to my cow. Before long, I was pounding on the door of the Cox household. "Elizabeth Cox," answered. She looked tired, but her hair was still in place. She hadn't gone to bed. "What's going on?" I barked angrily. She smiled nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "I don't know what you're talking about. Are you all right?" "Like hell you don't. Where's Aaron? Or are you going to pretend he's in your bed again?" I asked. She stiffened and gripped the hem of her shirt. "Aaron's fine. It's none of your business." I stomped my foot on the ground. "He made it my business when he killed Betsy." Elizabeth winced. "I'm so sorry. He hasn't been himself lately." She trailed off, lowering her gaze in shame. "Was he even with you yesterday, or was that a lie?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Do you know what's going on with him?" I pressed. She paused, looking uncomfortable. She moved aside and motioned for me to follow her into the living room. I did. "It's the moon," she whispered. "The moon?" She nodded. "He said he can hear it calling to him. I know it sounds mad. Please, I don't want him to get locked up. It'll pass. I'm sure it'll pass. He's just sick. Haven't your parents ever told you about this? It happens here sometimes." Her eyebrows came together. She held her breath and tensed. "Sometimes they get better on their own." I leaned against the wall, remembering the stories my parents had told me. Stories of people going mad. Tiny outbreaks of some sort of disease, they thought. It hadn't happened in so long. It was assumed they were cases of mad cow disease of something of the sort, but back then, they hadn't had the tools to test for it yet. Could this be what was happening now? "Aaron needs to get help," I told her. She shook her head. "It'll pass, I promise. I don't want to risk him getting institutionalized. I promise, I'll keep him inside from now on." I relented. As long as he stayed away from my livestock, it didn't really matter to me what he did. Besides, I didn't want to be the one who had one of the village's beloved citizens sent to the loony bin. It would get out. People would talk. I would get shunned, and so would Elizabeth. I didn't want that for her or for me, so I promised to keep quiet. Still, I couldn't help thinking of what she said, or rather, what Aaron told had her. The moon. He said it spoke to him. I'd seen him howl to it twice now. I'd seen him so completely entranced by it that he didn't notice my presence at all. I'm sure you've heard the term lunatic before, right? Do you know the origins of the word? Lunatic comes from the Latin word luna, the moon. They used to think the moon caused mental illnesses. Something about its light keeping people awake at night, making people lose their minds. And when you think about it, is it that impossible? If the moon is strong enough to influence the tides, Just imagine what it can do to the human body. Think about it. We're comprised of around 70% water. Really, it's almost silly to think that the moon can't affect us. And in Mileham, a little village so far from the bright city lights, the moon seems to glow twice as strong. What I'm trying to say is that, when I woke up early this morning with blood and chicken feathers caked on my lips, when I felt how sore my throat was, when I saw the moon shining through the clouds and felt the distant, magnetic hum it emitted, I understood. It's beautiful. The curve of it, the deep craters that scar its silver surface, they leave me with this feeling of admiration welling inside of me. They leave me with a desire, no, a need, to go outside and greet it. It shines so bright. It's so beautiful. I understand now. There's nothing wrong with getting a little moonstruck. Second story. There's a werewolf in my town. I didn't believe in it until recently. I think the sightings first started up about 10 years ago. That's the same time my family moved to this town. I was only 12 at the time. Since then, many have claimed to have seen some sort of wolf or hyena-like animal running around. Supposedly, it roams the forest right next to our neighborhood at night. I went around and interviewed the eyewitnesses. Every description was the same. They said it has thick brown fur and bright blue eyes. It also has the ability to stand on its hind legs and is about my height when fully upright. These sightings are common enough that even the law enforcement officers believe in this werewolf. They say there are no officially recorded wolves or mountain lions or any other similar animals in this area that could explain the sightings. They've also tried to catch it more than once, but it clearly has human-level intelligence, since it has always been able to evade them. And no one knows where it goes during the day. The sightings just seemed to get more and more common as the years flew by, to the point where even my parents had claimed to see it once or twice. My mother says she saw it running across a road while driving home from work late at night, while my father said he saw it creeping around our front yard, before leaping over the fence and running back into the woods where it lurks. Everyone in this town claims to have seen this werewolf at some point, except for me. I don't believe in the thing. Why should I? Everyone knows eyewitness accounts are the least reliable form of evidence, since they can easily be fabricated, exaggerated, or misinterpreted. That said, just recently, some extremely convincing physical evidence has been found. For instance, some people have photographed large footprints clearly canine in origin, but much larger than that of a fox or coyote. More gruesomely, hikers have been finding carcasses with their necks and spines violently snapped open with powerful bone-crushing jaws. Ever since these deaths turned up, everyone in town has been keeping their pets and livestock indoors at night for safety, especially since the creature seems to be losing its fear of humans, hence the recent sightings of it in urban areas. One of our elderly neighbors even claimed she saw it digging through her garbage right by her window. She says it turned right in her direction, before going over to the window, pressing its muzzle against the glass and breathing powerful, hungry breaths before she ran to her bedroom, pulled the blanket over her head, and stayed there until morning. After hearing that story, I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. Even if it wasn't a werewolf, there was clearly something in our town wreaking havoc. Maybe a feral dog, or even an escaped hyena that someone was keeping as an illegal exotic pet. I decided I was going to try and catch the creature on film myself, no matter how difficult it would be. I set up a camouflage tent in the backyard, right next to the forest, and brought with me a headlamp, a video camera, and a gun. The latter I brought just in case I needed to defend myself from this animal. I set the camera up on a stand right outside the tent, pointed towards the woods, before crawling into my tent, zipping the door shut, and falling asleep. The next morning, I felt a breeze coming from the front of the tent. I sat up, and nearly had a heart attack when I saw that there was a gigantic hole torn in the tent door. I peeked out of the hole and noticed the chewed-up carcass of a turkey lying in front of the tent, along with large paw prints surrounding it. He was here, I thought. I wanted to be excited, but I was mainly terrified. I had been extremely close to being this animal's dinner. The animal had torn open my tent, then for whatever reason, decided I wasn't worthy of a meal. Maybe the videotape will explain everything. I hooked the camera up to my computer and uploaded it before examining the footage. At the very beginning of the video, I saw myself setting the camera up before stepping out of view to get into the tent. The next hour of footage was unfortunately corrupted for whatever reason, so I skipped ahead another few hours. At approximately 3 a.m., I saw a big furry wolf-like creature walk out of the woods, its eyes shining brightly in the dark. It was carrying the same dead turkey from before in its jaws. The creature then walked over to the tent, dropped the turkey to the ground, and reared up on its hind legs like a bear. I felt chills run through my skeleton as the animal leaned forward and disappeared completely from the camera. Not only had it torn open my tent, but it had crawled into the tent with me as I was sleeping. I held my breath, desperately waiting for the animal to come crawling out of my tent and run back to the woods where it came. But it never did. Instead, as the sun rose up over the backyard, I saw myself climb out through the hole in the tent, walk over to the camera, and shut it off. After the footage was over, I felt anxious and confused. Even though that shot of it entering the tent was out of view of the camera, I'd expect to see some sort of movement from its paws as it tore the tent open. It was as if the opening in the tent was already there when it entered the yard. Had it torn the tent open in the corrupted footage? Also, if it had slept with me in the tent the entire night, how come it wasn't there when I woke up? The footage should have shown it going through the opening, and it's not like there was any other way of leaving the tent. Then it hit me. I suddenly remembered all those mornings where I would wake up with dirty hands and feet for no explainable reason, and those mornings where my breath would smell worse than usual, as if I had devoured a whole bunch of rotting meat as a midnight snack. My heart sank. The entire room began to swirl around me as I struggled to stand. All of the pieces were falling into place. Why the creature only appeared at night, while I was sleeping? Why I was the only one in town who had never seen the thing? Why the camera had caught it entering the tent, but not leaving? It turns out, the camera had caught the creature leaving the tent, and that creature was the one who set up the camera in the first place. Third story: The Shepherd and the Lonely Werewolf. It took me 12 nights to figure out what the littlest werewolf wanted from me. I'd stand in the sheep pasture at twilight and glare at her as she crouched in the sagebrush, her unblinking golden eyes tracking my every step. My old sheepdog Zeus would bark and claw in the red dust, agitated and protective, yet too lazy to make chase. But the wolf never tried to steal a sheep. She never moved at all. At least, not unless I broke her gaze and looked away for a moment. Then I'd glance back, and she'd be gone, in an instant disappearing into the pinyon and juniper trees of the Hummingbird Hills, that sunless thicket where the less benevolent of the gods were rumored to lurk. I'd stand quietly and listen to her mournful howl bring down the moon, a bewailing that echoed through the canyons and vibrated the dry grass beneath my feet. "Kill the white man," seemed to be her lament, carried on the cool night winds. Kill him. Her words confounded me. There were certainly no white men around here. Living in a remote pueblo in the desert canyonlands of northern Arizona, the only white men I ever encountered were the occasional sheriff's deputy or government agent, well-intentioned Mormon missionaries promising a marvelous afterlife, or anthropologists fascinated by our complex pantheon. All of these visitors were politely escorted away. Even still, the presence of the little wolf bedeviled me, for I quickly understood that I was the only one who had yet seen or heard her. "A real wolf, Papa?" my youngest daughter Ariadne asked me one morning, as I told her and her sisters the story over breakfast. "Or a creature quite like it," I said, finishing my cereal with one hand, stirring sugar into my coffee with the other. "I reckon there's a breath of something primate and conscious in there." "What makes you think she's not all wolf?" my middle daughter Antiope asked. "She crouches in the same place every day and never looks at the sheep. She watches me alone, with the saddest of eyes. Her ears flick at the sound of my voice, and her own howl is unusually expressive and forlorn." "But a human can't howl," my oldest daughter Arachne declared. "Maybe she's a god in disguise," I said, winking at her. "Or their half-human child, the daughter of a wolf god, born to a human mother who feared it so much she abandoned it in the desert to die." My wife Leah suddenly dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, and I turned in surprise. I hadn't noticed her there, standing at the stove, listening to the conversation. "What do you think it is, Mama?" Antiope asked her, unconcerned. Leah shrugged and took a sip of her coffee from the mug in her hands. I looked, but saw no broken mug. I blinked, figuring I'd only imagined the loud smash and the fragmented splinters of earthenware. "Isn't the Fish and Wildlife Service reintroducing gray wolves around here?" she said. "They're trying to clear the overpopulation of deer at the Grand Canyon. Maybe one of those wolves wandered across." "Maybe," I agreed. "But this one speaks to me, I think. Just like Annie Cassandra," Ariadne said. "She hears the wind speak to her in human words. It makes her twitch and fall down asleep, and behind her eyes she sees the faces of the gods who make the wind." "Cassandra's mind is very ill," Leah said. "Leave her alone, and leave the wolf alone. If it is a god, it's best not to meddle in whatever task it must complete. Would anyone like some coffee?" The brewer steamed and hissed. The radio buzzed and hummed the morning news and the weather reports. I had to admit, I couldn't dispute my wife's assertion, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't get the narrative out of my head of the little cub with a mortal mother and a divine father, a child with an uncanny inclination towards turning canine when the moon rose in the sky. It brought a little spark of thrill to the slow turn of life, the life of society's outliers, out among the barren rust-colored desert. Letting my imagination run wild, I thought of my son, somewhere far from home, being cared for by the spider god who called him her beloved. I gazed at my daughters, young and vulnerable, yet so untamed and wild. I thought of the human mother who might, at this moment, be wondering where her little half-divine wolf cub was huddling, imagining her child lost among the old trees and the voices of the night. Was she scared? Was she hungry? Was she shivering with cold in these crisp autumn evenings after the sun went down, yearning for the familiar warmth of home? I loved my own children more than anything. I understood that primal, animalistic urge to protect one's defenseless offspring. My heart softened towards the staring and unmoving cub. Her origins were an enigma to me. But, were she my own daughter, I'd certainly hope another parent would be there to keep a vigilant eye on her and listen to her unspoken desires. The next evening, I began to bring small scraps of mutton and elk jerky to the wolf girl. She'd cower if I walked too close, pulling back her lips to show me her gleaming white fangs. "Kill the white man," she rasped, in a voice like radio static. "First you must eat," I whispered affectionately. "Then you may kill whatever ghost you happen to find." I was often close enough to smell her, only briefly. She carried the sweet scent of burning sagebrush and tobacco in her fur. Once, I thought I saw a single tiny, glistening tear emerge from her sunken eye and roll down her snout. "Kill him," she howled from afar. "Kill what man?" I asked. "There is no white man here. Only me, and I'm the only one who knows you're here. Why won't you let me help you?" She stared, silent as ever. But she did not run from me that evening. Encouraged by her sprouting interest in being nurtured, I turned up a few old baby blankets. Within their folds, I tucked bits of fragrant lavender and soothing catnip. I left them under a pinyon tree near the border to the dense forest of the Hummingbird Hills. I'd taken care of her hunger and her shivering. All I could do now was try to heal her loneliness, to take her somewhere warm and inviting, and reunite her with the family from whom she surely must have been forced to depart. But that was not to be. On the 12th day, I was paid a visit by a deputy of the county sheriff. I was spending a lazy autumn day in the kitchen garden, checking the tall stalks of blue corn for ripeness, pulling back the husks to get a swift glimpse of their deep indigo kernels, their rare beauty as hidden and lustrous as a dragon's cache of jewels. For a moment I imagined myself the hero of that story, slaying the dragon and stealing its bounty. He didn't see me watching him as he drove up the winding road that spiraled around the mesa on which our pueblo was perched. His clunky white pickup truck rumbled and roared across the ancient bridge of bones that connected Mercury Mesa to Jupiter Mesa, and followed the dusty red road to where I stood, a fat husk gripped too tightly in my hands. Deputy Babbitt got out of the truck and faced me, covering the gun on his hip, watching my hands, avoiding my eyes. Babbitt didn't much care for people like me. We didn't much care for deputies. "Sir," he nodded, trying to look casual in a place so backward and foreign to a white man. He swept off his sun-bleached cowboy hat and leaned against the hood of the truck, stubbing out his cigarette with his pale leather boot. "How's everything going around the farm? How's your wife and that beehive of daughters?" I looked over my shoulder to make sure my family was safe inside the house. I remembered then that Leah had taken the children along to see the traveling carnival in Conab. Zeus was probably asleep in the sheep pasture. "Mr. Beartooth," Babbitt said when I didn't answer, "I've heard a rumor that you've spotted a wolf nearby, one that's stalking your sheep and eating your food." "Rumor?" I said. "Gossip, certainly. There haven't been wolves around here for 50 years. You ought to know that. Who told you I'd seen a wolf?" "Cassandra Maldonado. She won't speak to me, but I heard her young daughter's gone missing, and I believe the girl may have been dragged away by the wolf your kids are telling everyone about." Poor Cassandra. Her daughter was all she'd had. But if there was anyone who craved utter solitude, it was Cassandra. She lived a hermetical life on the dusty outskirts of the pueblo, with only her cows for company, and we all assumed that's the way she wanted it. I myself had always been uneasy around her, never sure what to say or where to look when I'd bring her gifts of surplus peaches, and she'd begin to yelp and swear and convulse. But we all avoided her, back then. We told ourselves it was what she needed. I was vaguely sorry to hear her child was missing. I'd forgotten she had a child. I turned my back on the sheriff's deputy and back to my corn. "I've told you all I know," I said to him, my fingers idly digging at the brittle husks, not knowing even what they were doing. I hoped he wouldn't see my hands shaking. "I think it's time for you to leave, deputy." Babbitt was quiet for a long moment. "Well, I have the feeling there's something else you're not telling me," he said, his voice as low and discordant as a rattlesnake's tail. I clenched my jaw. I waited. I opened and closed a corn husk again and again, entwining my fingers in the gossamer green tassel, feeling the taut bulge of milk beneath the swollen kernels. I glanced at the garden shears on the opposite side of the garden, imagining the crunch they'd make as they sheared off the man's nicotine-stained fingers. There was a sound of a door opening and closing. I turned around again. Deputy Babbitt was dragging a brownish-gray bundle from the bed of his truck. His hands and his white jacket were stained with its blood. I knew right away what I was seeing. Its fur was matted and dirt-clogged. Its caved-in side was stained with a rust-colored smudge. Its tongue hung out of a mangled snout, and its amber eyes stared straight ahead, into my own eyes, as they always had, never breaking that line of sight. Babbitt dropped it heavily on the ground, and finally stared at me forthright. "Don't you ever lie to me like that again," he hissed into my face. "I've just done you a favor by shooting this dangerous animal, and now I expect to be thanked, not deceived. I put my life in danger for your flock, for your wife, for your children. You don't have to like me, but you do have to respect me. That's all I ask. There are worse predators out there than this one, and you have no idea what I've done for you. To let you people quarantine yourselves up here without interference. My family has lived in Arizona for a century, civilizing this barren dust bowl, trying to guide your people into the modern world, and all we get back from you is suspicion and scruple. Now don't you dare take my protection for granted and ruin it for the ones that want progress and improvement. Don't you dare violate that tenuous trust I've been generous enough to give, even as I overlook your flaws. Don't you dare." I glared, straight ahead, our faces so close I could smell the remains of his cigarette in his white mustache. I did not sever my gaze with his. I thought of the littlest werewolf, speaking through the silence, pleading with her eyes. He couldn't hold for long. He kicked the wolf's body with his white boot. "So that's all you've got?" he growled. "No thanks, no gratitude? Does this dead menace mean nothing to you?" "You are nothing to me," I said. "One day you, too, will lie in the sand, but you won't get a burial nearly as grand as hers. Your mouth will fill with dust and cornmeal. Your tongue will be replaced by a scorpion's tail. Your eye sockets will be the nursery for a rattlesnake's eggs. Your ribs will be made hollow by the sun and will whine in the wind like a bone flute." "Is that a threat?" he said, backing away, "or a curse?" "Neither," I said. "It's an expectation, an aspiration, an invocation." He gritted his teeth. Then he turned, smashed his hat back onto his head, and got into his truck. I waited for him to cross the bone bridge before I turned and crouched at the side of the little wolf girl, another father's daughter, my pollen-covered fingers stroking her ears, still soft, still listening to words carried on a wind that blew from another world, the land of the dead. I lay there until the sun set. Then I carried her down the mesa and buried her at the edge of the sheep pasture, the place where I'd first seen her, waiting, quietly begging me to listen to her wolf words. I smudged her nose and forehead with all the corn pollen remaining on my hands, as one does to both the newly dead and the newly born, as I had done to all my children and later to my father. Zeus watched for a while, sitting on his haunches, before he finally let out a low, ululating howl that echoed off the hills and resonated through the canyons and reverberated in the craters of the luminous silver moon. He led me back home, where Leah and the children had already gone to bed. In the night, I woke, feeling as if I'd heard my name whispered in a dream. I rolled over to watch the moon out the window, but the clouds had gathered, covering it in a pearlescent shroud. "Hephaestus," a voice called to me into the stillness and the holy dark, a voice that sounded like Cassandra's. Hephaestus, she was pregnant. "Too young to be," I said, and could not contain my tears. She was only 13. "Too young," I said again. too gentle to endure thee? I sat straight up. Was she born human? Not a wolf. Fully human, Cassandra whispered. Deeply loved. Who transformed her? The voice was silent. I looked down at Leah, asleep next to me, untroubled by the whispers. I wondered if I had only dreamt the conversation, for immediately it was lost in the haze of linear time, just like the coffee mug that had never shattered. Soon I too slept again, a restless doze that allowed my mind to walk barefoot across the desert sands, leaving no footprints, wandering under a swiftly spinning sky whose stars had no names. The following morning, I found the body of Deputy Babbitt at the far end of the sheep pasture. He had been scalped, flayed, and disemboweled, his entrails making spirals and curlicues in the dust. His throat had been torn out, left in bloody tatters of oozing, putrefying shreds of flesh. His genitals had been torn almost completely from his body, left dangling and mangled. His toenails and fingernails had been yanked out of their bleeding cuticles. His mouth, open in an eternal scream of agony, was stuffed with dried sagebrush and cactus thorns. His ribcage, splayed open to reveal a half-eaten heart and lungs, made a wailing, keening noise that swelled and receded with the icy wind. I looked at my fingertips, again dusted with corn pollen. Then I wiped my hands on my jeans and did not touch the dead man's forehead. From afar, I felt myself being watched. I turned. Watching me from the other side of the fence was an enormous wolf with green eyes that wept human tears. Its fur was black all over, like a person in mourning. It gazed at me not with fear or caution, as the young one had, but with attentive rage. "Who are you?" I asked, holding its gaze, my hand on the hunting knife at my hip. "It ought to be your wife lying there in the dirt, rotting alongside the man," said the black wolf, in a voice like the whispers I had heard in the clouded night. "Your dispute is not with Leah," I said. "She's done nothing wrong." "Leah never asked my permission to transform my daughter," said the black wolf. "She acted hastily, and by the time I found out what happened, she could not undo what she had done. My Ida didn't have to die. She didn't have to suffer in the cold night, alone and starving, wondering why this perversion had been put upon her." "I don't understand," I said. "I loved my daughter. I loved her. She was all I had. I would have loved her baby, in a way that nobody in this desert ever loved me. You've all rejected and abandoned me, forced me to live far away from everyone. You hated Ida for her slow mind and slow speech. You hated me for the way I twitched and fainted. Yet still I had no desire to be a wolf. Magic in the hands of one with an unsound mind is perilous. But when the deputy came around, talking rumors about my Ida, I transformed myself anyway to be close to my little one forever. And now it's too late. You've all killed her." The black wolf stepped closer to me. "Leah stole something from me, in more ways than one. She stole it to carry out her private vengeance on the white man. But my own vengeance is not complete. Warn your wife that when I see her again, I will tear her apart, piece by piece. I will prolong her suffering for years, as I replace her human body with this wolf's body. I refuse to become human again until I've been satisfied." Then she stood on her hind legs, becoming as tall and straight-backed as the tallest human. She bolted into the overgrown woods of the Hummingbird Hills, to where the sun refused to shine. I confronted Leah that night by the fireplace. "Don't keep secrets from me like that," I said, softly, restraining my impatience, my indignation. "I had every right," she said. "It's not the first and won't be the last." "Why, Leah?" Why did you turn Ida into a wolf? You're not a shaman or a witch. You have no right to be using magic against a child. Why would you do something so contemptible? Leah was listening to a record of Bach violin sonatas while she drank watermelon wine straight from the bottle. Its sweet smell could not overtake the steely scent of blood that saturated the room. She set it down, hard, on the wooden floor and looked me straight in the eye. I was protecting Ida. When Cassandra showed me the black moth encased in amber, a gift she claimed to have been given by the wolf god White Paws, she swore it would turn me into a wolf. I could finally kill Babbitt with no consequences, as I had wanted to do for so long, but I found that I couldn't. I had too much to lose. I have a home and children and a job. Instead, when I saw Ida was pregnant, I gave the piece of amber to her and changed her into a wolf. I forbade her from telling her mother, and I sent her out into the desert to hunt that lowlife scum. Protecting her? From what? You seem to have tied a knot even you cannot untangle. I told you, Ida was pregnant. Who do you think was the father of her child? And who do you think is Ida's father, too? The deputy, I said, suddenly feeling small and simple for not making the connection until now. Ida had always been more light-skinned than the rest us, and we had mistrusted her because of it. What an abomination for a man to beget a child on his own daughter.
I gave Ida gift.
Leah continued, the gift of carrying out vengeance. The only gift I could give that would match the generosity of a wolf god. I would have wanted that privilege for myself years ago. I was younger than she when Babbitt raped me, and my rage had a knife's edge. I raged because I was powerless, and his power is so unbounded that he killed Ida anyway, not to protect himself from the accusation, but because he could. Eventually, he would have found some other girl to victimize, and then what would we do? Turn all our girls into a colony of bats? Would you want to see your own daughters hanging upside down in a cave all day, unable to live a beautiful life in the sunshine? I admit I used magic that did not belong to me, and which I had no right to try to control. But you need to understand that I only intended to protect the girl. I told Ida she must be the one to slay Babbitt, to force him to look into her eyes in the moment of his death, to regret his actions, to understand that the consequences were finally catching up with him. And once he was dead, I promised Ida I would find a way to make her human again. She never had the heart to kill him, I said. Too gentle a soul, abused until she had no will of her own. Too meek to stain her teeth with blood. Her blood is on your hands. Hephaestus, Leah said, again changing the subject. What about your role? Ida was begging you to kill the deputy, the white man. The white man in the white truck with the white hat and the white boots. Why didn't you do it? Once you saw that she had failed to take him down. He was here, the day she was shot. You didn't tell me, but I could smell his scent all over the ground. When I arrived home, nobody would have seen you cut his throat. Nobody would have known. The gods would have devoured the body and protected you from the consequences had you asked. Why didn't you avenge me, avenge Ida, avenge all his past and future victims? Why didn't you listen to her cries? You overlooked her human desires and ignored what she was saying with her human voice. You treated her like some spoiled household dog who only wants a bed and a belly rub. Don't lay the burden of shame on me, I said. You misled me. You told me she was an ordinary wolf and to leave her alone. How could I have known Ida would fail? Clearly I'm not as clever or powerful as you think me to be. Leah scowled. A child is dead, she said, and all you care about is shifting the blame to anyone but yourself. You sound an awful lot like Babbitt right now. You're wrong, I fumed. I have been humbled, Leah, and I believe you are the merciless one. You used magic stolen from a vulnerable mother and left a little girl in a body she didn't want. You forced a child to fight your battle, and now Cassandra will be forever stalking you. She has her canine stare fixed on you, on your every move. One day, she'll pounce and take her revenge on you, and she will tear you apart piece by piece, year after year, and replace your body with a wolf's. And I will never be powerful enough to protect you. I can't. The blanket around her shoulders fell. She quickly pulled it back up, but not before I saw a flash of the gray-brown of a wolf's furry foreleg, hastily stitched onto the bleeding stump of her elbow with greasy sinew. I looked up from the fresh wound. I met her eyes. She glared back at me, eyes fiery, but I could not hold her gaze. I bent my head, and I hid my face in my hands. Fourth story, Valley of the Dire Wolf. Research indicated that it was nearly unimaginable for it to exist. We had looked at the approximate location through satellite images and saw nothing unusual. I knew that it was probably a hoax. I was certain it would be because the precise conditions for a temperate microclimate in the Arctic were unheard of and theoretically impossible. Yet Reginald Iris had insisted that he had obtained the specimen from the end of his explorations. He had never lied to me, and only on his deathbed did he reveal his secret. He had named it Valley of the Dire Wolf because there was fauna there that was left over from the last ice age, which was also theoretically impossible. I didn't want to believe it, but I did. That is why I privately funded my own expedition. I looked on maps and pictures from satellites and saw nothing to prove it existed, or that it even could exist. Yet in the vast, unexplored wilderness of polar deserts, there were places even on the coast that nobody had ever set foot upon. Except Reginald. He had visited. He had warned me, it isn't a place where people belong. It belongs to them. It is their world, not ours. A world hidden from our own. Only death. I put a lot of faith into scientific discovery and absolute devotion to what is known to science. The images should show something, yet the closest look I had showed only rocky and frozen tundra and clouds of white mist obscuring most of the valley. It was the temperature readings that intrigued me. Those indicated that it remained somewhere in the upper 40s and lower 50s all year round. I consulted some colleagues who could share their expertise, and each of them stated independently that it was possible that the valley had maintained that temperature for any amount of time, even tens of thousands of years. While it seemed nearly impossible for Reginald's story to be true, there was a possibility within the nearly impossible. That is how I ended up on my own exploratory expedition, kept private and personally funded. I cannot tell where we went or offer any evidence, because what we found was not meant for human trespassers. We found out while we were there that it was a sacred place, and to violate its sanctity is to be cursed. Reginald was right. Only death. On our first day, we entered the valley and found it was a sustained biome that had living creatures. It was truly a miracle to find plants and animals. Resilient ferns, elderly pines and archaic junipers, raspberries and pines dotted the landscape sparsely. We found hares and voles and a new species of furry armadillos. The fascinating discovery was to be documented and shared with the whole world. On the second day, we encountered two of the surviving megafauna, their populations sustained by the balance of plants and animals. Such a balance had existed for a very long time, keeping those creatures as living artifacts for the depths of time, older than human history. Herds of Elasmotherium and a smaller version of Megaloceros peacefully grazed, seemingly unaware of our intrusion into their corner of the world. These creatures have existed like this since the end of the last ice age, isolated and untouched. This valley has somehow remained like this, a perfect balance that has kept them this way all this time. One of my team members said, "There was much discussion and wonder, and we took many pictures and samples of bones and fur and anything else we could find. It was to be the discovery of a lifetime." I wrote about the entire experience in a journal, and it was all I kept. I alone and my journal were all that remained in the end. We found numerous hot springs that were as ancient as the valley and had billowed up heat and clouds, obscuring the valley from the modern eyesight from orbit. We could see the heat, but none of the details. The details we discovered on foot were of a lost world, a world of wonders. Our wonder did not last, as we ventured too far into the valley. Terror and dread soon plagued us. I tried to lead my team to safety after our first encounter with the guardians of the secret valley. They were intelligent, and at first, they only stalked us and surrounded us, howling in the night and preventing our escape. They had evolved over many thousands of years and learned to conserve and maintain, to cull and to protect. My deepest fear of them grew from the realization that they recognized us and would not let us leave. They spoke to each other in complex barking words, and we heard them talking. "The dire wolves have killed Kenneth," I realized when we could not find him. The creatures had tested us again and again, preventing us from backtracking out of the valley, toying with us, showing themselves and then hiding from us. They had learned all of our strengths and weaknesses, had picked out a member of our herd and taken him. With self-preservation and trepidation, we abandoned our search for Kenneth and tried to hike out. Before we could make our escape, they were there, a pack of 7, the descendants of a species as old as mankind and just as clever. Intelligence had served them well. They were the shepherds and the masters of the valley. It was their ancestral home, kept secret by nature and kept sacred by them. The dire wolves knew we were vulnerable, and they attacked. I panicked and abandoned my team. My heart was beating and my blood raced as I scrambled up some rocks. Below me I heard the terrified and pained cries of my team and the angry barking of the dire wolves. Soon the massacre was over, and when I looked, I saw neither man nor beast remained. All of our scientific equipment, supplies, and camping gear were all that was left of them. I trembled. The nightmare of my escape had just begun. There was blood amid the scattered belongings, but the dire wolves had taken the bodies somewhere else. They did not feed where the herds grazed. There were 7 wolves, and they had each carried away 1 team member. If they had counted us correctly, or if their pack membership were equal to the team roster, I would have died also. That is what I thought, in horror, of the dire wolves. Their dark, bristly fur and massive hunch and oddly shaped wolf-like body haunts my nightmares. When I began to creep through the last part of the valley's entrance, back to the polar deserts beyond, I was alone. I was never more vulnerable, and although I believed they would attack me and finish us all off, killing me last, they never did. My journey through the valley alone was fraught with daylight nightmares. I jumped at every shadow, felt like I could be pounced on from behind every bush. I heard their distant howls, and sometimes their howls were nearby. They were following me, waiting to take me last. My terror at knowing that death at their vicious teeth could come at any moment and the horror of knowing my team was already dead was like a spinning madness, making me laugh strangely as I hiked. It was dark as I reached the base camp. Our tents stood as a reminder of all those who I had left behind. The howls of the dire wolves made me turn and peer back into the shaded valley, beneath eternal white clouds of steam from the geysers and hot springs. I could see their eyes, watching me go. It was then that I realized they had chosen to let me leave. They could have easily hunted me and killed me, and I wouldn't have stood a chance. For their own reasons, they had allowed me to escape. I do not know why, but the thought of their deliberation still terrifies me. Such creatures with a magnitude of intelligence that they might make a choice of who lives and dies, and that they exercise their power over life and death and demonstrated it with my survival, is all the more dreadful. I do not pretend to know their thoughts, but I do recognize that they think and communicate among themselves. The dire wolves have learned to keep a language, to keep a tradition, and to prove it, forcing me to witness them and to know them in their sentience. Mere animals would have finished the job, but not the dire wolves. They have kept their ways sacred and storied for countless generations, taking only what they need to take, killing only what they need to kill. Letting me go was a choice they made, following the path of their minds, as they watched their herds, cultivating them like cattle. When they had eliminated the intrusion, they sent me home as a messenger. Somehow, they concluded I would keep the secret of their home's location and deliver only a warning. The Valley of the Dire Wolf belongs to them, and we are not meant to be there. There is no place for humans among the talking beasts, and it is a sin for us to seek them out. There is nothing there for us. It all belongs to them. The only thing for us in their home, only death. Fifth story, The Shadow of the Wolf. Before I begin, I'll give you some pretense. My name is Axel, and I am a 23-year-old man living partially reliant on my parents. Together, we live in upstate Alaska, not so far off the edge of Anchorage. A small, tucked-away town nestled in the woods. Anything and everything that we can't get from our neighbors or the surrounding woods requires at least 40 minutes of driving. That's for a one-way trip, mind you. By partially reliant, I mean that I live in their house, but I contribute my own rent, food, and utility money. It is not a lot, considering the basic home we have, but it made me feel like more of a man. And the low cost eased the pressure off my wallet, allowing me to buy things for my own enjoyment. I pride myself in being logical and mentally sound. Ghost stories do not scare me, though they serve to give me mighty entertaining evenings. And any fears of wild things out in the woods, which were not unjustified due to predators in the area, were quickly dissuaded when I purchased a hunting shotgun for my 20th birthday. Like it or not, I have yet to meet a creature alive that resists 12-gauge completely. I believe the old adage is, if it bleeds, you can kill it, though there are many variations. It is important to note that I keep the gun in my back seat, loaded, but chamber empty, so that any jolts don't set off the trigger and give my passenger door a case of lead poisoning. So, understanding all of this, I hope you can come to realize why the fear I felt was so foreign, so intense, that I became afraid of the fear itself. It began one evening, a normal day with clear skies that had been woefully uneventful, a fact doubled by my boss letting me know that he had enough hands on deck for the weekend. There was a lack of snow on the ground, a rare occasion in winter, but the grass outside had frost on it that sparkled in the dying light of the sun. My mother had asked me to drive to the store and pick up a few groceries. Meat was already taken care of, so it was just a few simple herbs. Any annoyance at taking such a long drive for likely no more than $10 of ingredients was far overshadowed by the satisfaction of having something to do. Grabbing my keys, I quickly ran across the driveway, trying not to breathe the far below frozen air too deeply. The rusted old truck I drove had a terrible heater, and I probably wouldn't get much warmer until I made it to the store. With my breath fogging against the windshield, I made my way into the back roads. On either side of me, extinguishing any light the near-dead sun would have allotted me, were thick masses of pine trees. The first half of my journey was uneventful, as was the shopping itself, save for one detail. Animal Crossing signs were always prevalent on these roads, moose being the main threat. So when I saw a new sign, one with fresh paint and an odd red reflective coat, I couldn't help but read it. Warning: timber wolf pack sighting. Aside from the silhouette of a large wolf on the sign, no other indicators were given. I can admit now that the choice of wording was a bit strange. Typically, they simply say something like "Animal Crossing" and a silhouette of whatever animal was in question. Any confusion or questioning I had faded just as fast as the sign flew by my side. In fact, the sign was entirely forgotten about by the time I had rung up the ingredients requested of me. Once again, crossing the lot to my truck exposed me to the freezing air. But this time my truck's age paid for itself with the amazing insulative properties of a solid steel body, and the cabin was actually comfortable when I got back. With the radio shifting between static and old country blues, I began the second half of my drive back, noting the time had already crawled to 9 p.m. Once the tiny collection of streetlight had disappeared in my rearview mirrors, I was left with absolutely no light besides my dim yellow headlights. Bored as I was, the drive served to be relaxing, giving me plenty of time to think, an overly common pastime of mine. I was perhaps halfway through crafting the subplot of my very own movie when the same red sign flashed out against my headlights, nearly unnatural in its glaring brightness. The briefest of chills brushed my neck and I cussed, making sure all windows were soundly rolled up. When I finished my check, having seen no gap between glass and door, the sign was long behind me. Though the chill had left me, I dropped a gear to raise the RPM of the engine, hoping the additional motion would translate into more heat for me. Not even a minute after I heard my radio cut out. It didn't go silent, but the shift from music to static was hard and sudden. Behind the static, in place of where music should have been, was the faintest high-pitched ringing, like microphone feedback resonating with itself. It was piercing, yet overpowered by the static that now seemed just slightly louder than any music I had been listening to so far. I went to crank down the volume, already beginning to feel an earache coming along. I twisted once, twice, and on the third turn the knob fell right off, bumping my leg and landing somewhere in the passenger floorboard. I cussed again. Even if the radio was at a more acceptable volume, I still had to find that part before it disappeared into the same unknown space every mechanic's 10mm goes to. In a rather stupid decision, I centered my truck between the two-lane asphalt, giving myself enough room on either side to not roll into a ditch while I was rooting around next to me. My eyes were off the road for perhaps 3 seconds total, my fingers almost immediately finding the radio knob and chucking it into my door handle. But when I looked up, there was a figure in the road. It didn't dart out like some swift shadow, but simply sat there as I approached. I was lucky for my earlier drop in gear, as it reduced my speed and gave me time to hit the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, tires screeching while my eyes flung dangerously close to the steering wheel before the seatbelt caught me. I lurched as it stopped and was rocked back into my seat and into the perfect position to stare at the figure in the road. I had half expected the damn thing to dart away as it realized the glowing 2-ton mass of metal was heading towards it. Instead, my gaze met the eyes of a wolf, barely a dozen feet from the front of my truck. It, like myself, was situated perfectly in the center of the road. My headlights cast against its body, painting the animal's shadow against the aged pavement beyond it. Even as I caught my breath, the wolf did not move. Its pitch-black coat betrayed the earlier sign of timber wolves, but damn if this thing wasn't huge. I swear its head was damn near in line with my own, or at least up to the hood. Enough that, even crouched over as wolves are, its posture still allowed its own eyes to lock with mine. God, those eyes. That's where it started. Though unnerving in size, I was certain that anything this wolf could try would at worst leave some dents and scratches into my truck, which was already a relic. But those eyes, They burned a deep crimson, as if an artist had perfectly captured the embers at the center of a campfire, but had run out of orange and yellow to paint them, settling on the bloodiest of reds. I was frozen then, though I didn't realize it for a few more moments. I could only stare it back, the ungodly shade of red seeming to burn itself into my mind. I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing. Then it began to change. No, I'm getting it mixed up. The wolf itself did not change, but the air did. The radio static, having before been reduced to nothing but a dull roar in my ears, was ever so slowly ramping up in intensity. The ringing was back, now beginning to overtake the static in its volume. My ears stung, my eyes burned. I was cold. Everything continued getting worse from there. I began shivering subconsciously as I gazed at the wolf, seeing its massive form casting shadows behind it. Was it closer now? I couldn't tell. From my peripheral vision, my eyes still locked with its own, I could see movement behind it. The shadows were moving, rolling, bubbling, shifting. They grew and shrank, stretched and contracted. God, it felt like the shadows were screaming at me. It felt like the wolf's eyes were glowing brighter. God, it was closer. Not by much, maybe only a few feet, but it had moved. How did it move? I was staring right at it, unblinking even, and yet I never saw a thing. I felt cold, beyond cold. Like the chill seeping into my veins was slowly coagulating my blood, thickening it until it felt like my heart was pumping slush through my veins. I wasn't breathing. The fear started then. First it was confusion, then apprehension, and now I was afraid. The moment I realized the fear, it seemed to multiply hundreds of times. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, but I had to, primal fear taking over me. I needed to put miles, no, worlds between me and this thing. My body shook violently, damn near seizing. Whether it was from the cold or my efforts to move, I cannot say. It was closer again, 6 feet at most. Those shadows still rolled, ripping apart and converging like mutating meat. The feeling was beyond fear now. It wasn't simply me being afraid of being mauled to death by this wolf. No, in that moment mauling would have been a better alternative. It was as if I was afraid this creature would somehow destroy the very idea of me, rending my soul into tatters and tearing into my spirit like fresh bloody meat. Escape was no longer on my mind, at least not physical escape. As the wolf approached, somehow moving despite my eyes telling me otherwise, it placed a paw onto the hood of my truck. I began straining for a different kind of movement. I tried to reach in the back, towards the shotgun I kept in the seat. No, dear reader, I was not reaching back with the intention of placing buckshot into this creature's head. I was reaching backwards with the intention of killing myself, blowing my brains out at whatever cost, in the hope that the swift death it brought me might save my essence from being torn apart by this otherworldly predator. But I could not move. I was trapped in my own shaking, ice-cold body. My chest burned with both a lack of oxygen and the feeling of my heart struggling to move my blood, now feeling like molasses within my veins. My ears stung with the sound of the radio's incessant ringing, and now I swore I could hear screams from it as well. Human, animal, and anything else you can image, all crying in terror and fear. The wolf was perched entirely on my hood now, glaring down at me through the windshield as the entire truck had lurched forwards under its weight. Its gaze burned. The expression of the wolf was not what one would expect from a predator about to catch a meal. It seemed as if it was only observing me, waiting for me to die. Soon I would, as I was now certain my heart had given up its futile effort to move my frozen blood. Then, barely audible over the radio, there was another sound. A deep, splintering crack, far unlike anything simply stepping on a branch. It was the sound of an entire tree's trunk being swiftly rent apart. The wolf's head snapped to the side, freeing me of its gaze. My veins ached as blood began to move again, feeling like ice crystals were being pushed through them. I raked in a breath of air, one that was not ice cold, but rather the stale warm air of my truck's cabin. Along with the wolf, I instinctually turned to the source of the sound. It was a moose, but different. Its pelt was stark white against the black trees, its eyes glowing an incandescent blue, everything about it nearly mirroring the abomination perched on my hood, except its size. The sheer size of the beast caught me off guard. The wolf was still within the realm of possibility, though surely would have been the apex predator of whatever area it called home. But this moose was beyond massive, at least 12 feet at the shoulder with a rack wider than my own truck. Looking at it, I found the source of the cracking sound that had shook me loose of the wolf's impossible grasp. A pine tree, fully grown and plenty stout, had been shoved over by this thing's antlers. Now, its view unobstructed, it only stared at the wolf. And the wolf, for the first time since I had seen it, began to growl. The pitch-black fur on its back raised up as the wolf crouched, digging its claws into the hood of my truck. The growl was deep and rumbling, shaking the frame of the truck so much that I could hear loose objects rattling around. The moose responded, letting out the signature keening scream of a reindeer, but much lower. This sound shook my bones. The massive moose drug its hoof across the ground, creating a divot wide enough to make a sound grave, and snorted as it lowered its own head. The wolf, clearly far beyond anything I could hope to kill, began to back away. Like mercury, it seemed to almost flow off the hood of my vehicle, crouching onto the ground and retreating backwards into the woods, never breaking the gaze between the two creatures. When it was out of sight, and my blood had significantly thawed, the moose shifted its gaze to me. I felt no fear from it, but I did not feel like it was an ally either. Snorting again, it jerked its head down the road, as if telling me to leave, telling me that I wasn't welcome. I needed no further incentive to floor the gas, rocketing up to 80 miles per hour on thin back roads all the way back to my home. A 30-minute trip turned into just over 10 minutes, but it was long enough for my labored breathing to slow and for warmth to finally creep back into my bones. Upon my return, in which I sprinted from the driveway to the door, my parents must have known something was up. Deep inside I knew that they would never believe me if I told them everything. So I told them what I could. I nearly hit an animal on the road, a wolf, and in swerving I nearly fell into a deep ditch. Though they looked at me strangely, I told them the same thing I'll tell you. If you are alone on the roads at night and you see a wolf, don't stop or swerve. Simply look down and press the gas.